Episode 7, Paris, at midnight, to courage to dream again. Have you ever stopped dreaming? Not in the way of sleep, but the dreams that keep us alive. The ones that make us hope, plan, and believe that life can be more than it is right now? I had stopped dreaming for a while. I didn't realize it until I found myself walking alone through Paris at midnight. The city of lights, romance, and possibilities, yet I felt like a shadow in it. But that night, something changed. Paris whispered to me, reminding me what it means to hope, to trust, and to dream again. This is the story of how a midnight walk in Paris gave me the courage to begin again. I arrived in Paris on a cold October evening. It was a city I'd dreamed of visiting since I was a child. The Eiffel Tower, the cafes, the art. But when I finally got there, I felt strangely disconnected, like I didn't belong. I had been on the road for weeks, chasing sunsets and ticking places off my list, but inside, I felt empty. I had been running from something, though I wasn't sure what, and I had lost sight of where I was headed. That night, unable to sleep, I decided to go for a walk. The city was quieter at midnight, the crowds gone, the streets bathed in a soft golden glow from street lamps. I walked aimlessly, hands in my pockets, my breath misting in the cold air. Eventually, I found myself on the banks of the Seine, the river shimmering under the moonlight. The Eiffel Tower stood in the distance, its lights sparkling like a heartbeat against the night sky. There was something about Paris at midnight, soft, quiet, but alive in a way I couldn't explain. As I stood there, staring at the lights reflected on the river, I felt it, a heaviness in my chest. It wasn't sadness exactly, but something deeper, a loss of direction, a loss of belief. When had I stopped dreaming? The dreams I once had about writing, creating, building a life I loved had been buried somewhere along the way, hidden beneath doubts, failures, and the noise of everyday life. I had told myself to be realistic, to stop hoping for too much, and standing there, in the heart of a city that had inspired dreamers for centuries, I felt ashamed. Paris had always been a place of possibilities, of artists and poets, of those who dared to dream big, and yet, here I was, a stranger to myself, too afraid to dream at all. That's when I heard a voice behind me. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" I turned and saw a man sitting on a bench nearby, a sketch pad in his lap and a pencil in his hand. He looked up at me and smiled faintly. "The city. It feels different at night." I nodded, unsure what to say. "It's quieter." He gestured to the sketch pad. "I come here to draw when I can't sleep, when the world feels too loud." I watched him for a moment as he shaded the lines of a bridge. Finally, I asked, "What do you do when you feel lost?" He paused, looking up from his work. "I keep creating," he said, "even when I don't know where it's going, especially then." His words hit me harder than I expected. I had stopped creating, I had stopped trying. Somewhere along the way, I had given up on the very dreams that had once given me life. The man must have seen something in my expression because he smiled again. "You know," he said, "Paris has a way of giving people their dreams back. You just have to be brave enough to let it." I sat down beside him, watching as he drew. The sound of his pencil scratching on paper was strangely calming, like a reminder that the act of creating itself is enough. You don't need to know where it's going. You just need to begin. We sat there in silence for a long time, the city breathing softly around us. Eventually, the man packed up his sketch pad, nodded at me, and said, "Dream something tonight, even if it's small." I stayed by the river a little longer, his words echoing in my mind. Dream something tonight. It was such a simple thing, but it felt like a lifeline. I'd spent so much time waiting for the right moment, the perfect plan, the certainty of success. But maybe I didn't need all of that. Maybe I just needed to start. On my way back to the hotel, I stopped at a small cafe that was still open. The waiter, half asleep, handed me a cup of coffee, and I pulled out a notebook I had been carrying for months but never used. I opened to a blank page, the paper glowing faintly under the cafe lights, and I began to write. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even good, but it was something. A story, a thought, a dream, small and fragile, but alive. For the first time in months, I felt hope. Paris didn't change my life that night, but it reminded me that I could. Dreams don't ask for perfection, they just ask for courage. The courage to begin again, to believe again, even when you're not sure where it will lead. So, here's my question for you. What dream have you been waiting to start? What would happen if you gave yourself permission to begin, right now, however small? Paris at midnight reminded me of something we all need to hear. It's never too late to dream again. Next week, we'll travel to Rio de Janeiro, where I learned that life, like music, isn't about perfection. It's about finding your rhythm and dancing to it. Until then, remember, every dream begins with a single step.